Over the past few years, New York City has gone from a city with only a few or a handful or two of breweries in the 5 boroughs themselves to a city of many breweries with lots of smaller or even nano-breweries opening up all over the 5 boroughs. One of those breweries is Transmitter Brewing in Long Island City. I was first introduced to them at the June New York City Homebrewers Guild meeting, where they presented the history of their brewery, what their philosophy is, and of course shared some of their great farmhouse ales. So after they finished their presentation, I introduced myself, told them about my blog, and asked if I'd be able to come down to the brewery for a visit. So finally, on Sunday, August 3rd, 2014, I took the 7 train, headed under the Pulaski Bridge, and headed to Transmitter Brewing. So sit back, grab a beer, and enjoy this in-depth tasting and interview with Rob and Anthony of Transmitter Brewing. Hey everybody, this is Barry from the Brewed Palate. I'm here with Rob and Anthony at Transmitter Brewing Company, one of the newest small nano breweries that's been, that opened in New York City, right under the bridge. And it's been a big trend lately that a lot of small breweries like this are opening up. So let's first pour one of their beers and then talk a little bit more about their brewery itself. Can you just tell us a little bit about the beer that we just...
So it's our version of a Belgian Golden Ale, brewed with Abbey yeast and bottle conditioned on Brettanomyces. Did some tropical fruit from the yeast and from the hops.
So which hops are you using this to give it that tropical fruit?
We don't do a flagship beer. We've done 20 different beers so far. So I'd have to look and tell you what hops are in it.
I know because I looked. This has some Azacca in it at the end.
It's a pretty new hop.
Yeah. Because we're small enough, we can buy small amounts of hops that we can use in a beer or two, and we don't have to search out 100 pounds of hops
for a flagship beer that you have to make continue. The same hop every time. We don't care. So.
Right. Right. So you guys have been around for how long? Officially?
We opened to the public 3.5 months ago.
So I guess you could tell us a little bit about how you guys got this place started, what it took to open a brewery. This is a very unique location to open up a small brewery. So how do you get from having the idea to open until you got here 3.5 months after opening?
So we kicked around the idea of opening a brewery and looked for space for a year. And we both live right on the other side of this bridge in Greenpoint. And Anthony's wife was walking over the bridge and saw a for rent sign. Anthony called about it, came down, called me, said you should take a look at this space, it's interesting. And the rest is sort of like a big long blur. We signed a lease in November after 3 months of negotiating a lease because it's New York City real estate.
Right.
And we built the place out over the winter, nights and weekends, basically the way we brew. And open our doors for Queens Beer Week. You can't apply for your TTB license until you have a physical location.
Right.
So as soon as we signed the lease, we put in for our TTB license, and 4 months later, we started brewing.
All right, so when I met you guys at the June New York City Homebrewers Guild meeting, we were talking a lot about yeast strains. I know you're very passionate about trying as many as possible. So can you just talk a little bit about your passion for yeast and how you, on a day-to-day basis, maintain all the yeast strains that you're working with?
Right. So I've homebrewed for close to 25 years, and early on I started culturing my own yeast. Sort of taught myself some microbiology and yeast handling, and kept my own yeast farm in the 90s, and then coming back to it I didn't really think I was going to sort of pick that up again, but it became apparent to us that New York could use a brewery that was distinctly yeast forward, and those are some of the beers we like to drink, and so we decided that was the direction we would head with what we do. Try to be pretty specific about the beers we make and the program, our beer program. You know, we don't really need to do an IPA. We won't do an ESB. You know, we tend to brew not particularly strongly to style. You know, we make a Belgian beer with Belgian yeast, but American hops or New Zealand hops. The yeast piece is important though, because to me it's what really defines what flavors are possible, and yeah, it's what makes beer beer. Otherwise, it's just sugar water.
Exactly. Exactly.
You know, in terms of sort of keeping up with strains, we rotate through the yeast we have in a way that tries to keep them at peak, in peak condition. You know, if we know we need to make a beer that uses a particular strain, we can put it into the schedule. If we haven't used the yeast in a while, we may go back and specifically make a beer to use that strain to keep it propagated up. Yeah, I mean, people are into it, I think.
Yeah, seems like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's been good.
So Rob, you guys have like a cool lettering and numbering system for your beers. So can you explain how that idea came about, and then how it helps you keep track of all the experimental beers that you're brewing? You know, because you don't brew the same beer twice.
You know, the label thing is a big part of the sort of logistics of brewing. All labels have to be approved by the TTB and then registered with New York State. So since we don't do flagship beers, we need to be able to easily change the label but still have it be branded. And we came up with the letter and the number as a visual identity brand, so that it's easily changeable. But you see it on the shelf, and it's a golden ale, and it's the third version or the fourth version or the first version. We just rebrewed the 0 version of Farmhouse Ale. It was 0 because we brewed it before we had the numbering system, and then when we had the numbering system, we're like, okay, this is F0, and now so we'll go back and reuse numbers and letters, just as rebrews. So, but I think so we didn't have to start from scratch for every label. It's a saison, so you want your saisons to all look sort of the same. You don't want your saison label to be one thing one day and a different thing the other day, and people are like, what is this? I'm confused, and they're already confused, and I get it. So.
Yeah.
But people are into it. I mean, it's a fun way to line them all up and see them all. Yeah. So this is our French saison. French saison yeast, very straightforward malt, grain bill.
It's really nice. It has a little bit of sweetness, but also a nice dry finish.
Yeah, we really like our beers dry, so we don't. I mean, saison yeast tend to attenuate very high.
Right. Exactly.
So, I mean, all our beers are really dry. Try to be.
One question I had for you, Anthony, actually, was I just brewed a rye saison recently, and I know it's in secondary, and I split the batch. One is clean and one has Brett Brooks and apricots in it. So, when I was brewing this saison, it's my second time brewing it, but I switched it to all grain instead of partial mash. And when you go online to the forums, there's always everyone has their opinion. This yeast needs to go this hot, and for this long, and if this goes wrong, this is what you should do. So, like, what's your opinion on really the best way to, if you like brewing saisons and farmhouse ales, what's like the best approach to take, you know, especially when you're starting out, like choosing the right yeast to get the flavor and managing the temperature and all the factors that go into brewing, you know, a really well-rounded saison.
Well, I mean, the saison yeast sort of take care of themselves in a way. You know, it's a perfect homebrew summer beer because the temperature of all the saison yeast can go pretty high.
Right.
You know, you can leave it out and 70, you know, anywhere between 75 and, you know, DuPont yeast can go as high as 95 degrees. So you don't have to pay too much attention to fermentation temperature. I mean, you can let it go and it won't hurt it.
It doesn't
won't
like
create
big
all
swings.
flavors. Right.
That's the DuPont stuff. Certainly, you know, you want to, you know, let it up and down slow. Like, it doesn't like to go from 85 to 40 or like, you know, 85 to 70, and then, you know, that'll stall.
Right. I mean, the typical Belgian saison yeast likes to stall sometimes. You know, the Y yeast Belgian saison tends to stall at like 10:25, something like that, and then people have to, you know, stir the ferment, like, you know, like swirl the carboy to get the yeast back up. And so how do you guys on your scale, like, make sure that all the strains you use actually do attenuate down as far as you need them to?
I mean, the saison, you know, we use 3711 quite a bit, which doesn't stall.
Right.
If we use the DuPont yeast, we'll often try to stall it, and then we'll add Brett to it to finish it. You know, like that's one way we use that yeast. Like let the temperature come up, and then let the temperature come down, and it'll stall at 8 or 9 Plato, and then we can add Brett, pitch Brett, and let the Brett work its magic at the end. It's kind of a fun way to use it. You know, if you keep the temperature high on that yeast
We've
whole time,
never had it stall intentionally. Like, we never stalled it. We didn't want it to stall. So, but it is keeping, you know, the temperature up to 85 degrees, which a lot of homebrewers are like, holy shit, I can't keep my beer at 85 degrees. I'm like, yeah, you can. Like, you know, we let this beer free ride out to the third day. Just let it go. You don't control it, and it, you know, naturally will go up because the yeast is exothermic. You know, you know, those fermenters get what, 15 degrees, 20 degrees sometimes. Heat made from the yeast.
Right. You know, you get a lot of metabolic heat as you grow in scale. There's, you know, a 5-gallon carboy has a lot of surface area to volume compared to a bigger fermenter. So those little carboys don't hold the heat the same way as this will, which works both ways, obviously. It means you have to use glycol to keep it low, but if you want it to go up, the yeast will naturally rise 10 degrees over ambient temperature during peak fermentation.
Right.
So,
actually, yeah. You know, before we maybe get onto another beer, a big thing nowadays, like you guys been doing, like hoppy. We talked about in the tour video, you know, hoppy beers with Brett, like 100% Brett. You know, people are doing pale ales, IPAs. You know, you guys aren't really doing that, but you're still doing hoppy Brett beers. So, you know, Rob, can you talk a little bit about, you know, what it takes to brew a hoppy Brett beer?
I'm gonna actually put this one in Anthony's court because he's the hop man.
It seems like the Brett really likes to chew through hops, the hop flavor. So, you know, we'll just go super heavy, lean on it towards the end, you know, hop burst it, and also know that over, you know, 6 months the hop is going to dissipate. So
just as much as it would do it in a sack.
Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe a little more. Maybe a little faster. But that said, as long as you have a beer that you have other interest in, you know, like that you make balanced and has other flavors that you're not relying strictly on hop flavor to drive the hops to drive the flavor, then you can still be left with something that's delicious.
Sure.
That's a little bit harder with. That's a little bit harder to do with 1056. Like where it's really strictly a yeast that is relying on the hops to give it any character at
It's
all.
so clean.
Right. So once the hops die, there's not much base left there to keep interest. By using Brett, we build flavor, sort of some fruity and funky flavors that still have still can keep your interest as the hops subdue.
We have some year-old F1 out in the world that people are drinking it are in love with, and it's not the hops they're in love with anymore. It's the Brett.
Right.
And it's a clean beer because it was primary fermentation on Brett, no Saccharomyces. So those Brett beers don't get funky like the mixed culture sort of do. It really needs some Saccharomyces to get really. Not always, but most of the time it needs some Saccharomyces to get super funky. It's if you do a single strain primary Brett, generally it doesn't be that. It's certainly the commercial versions of Brett. There's some wild versions of Brett that can get funky, but your Brett Trois and your Brooks, they're pretty clean. They can use them.
If you use them as a primary, you mean?
Primary only, like no secondary, no other yeast, no Saccharomyces.
Okay, so those two would be ideal if you're using 100% Brett, the Trois and the Bronx.
Yeah, we use them together or individually all the time.
How about let you introduce the third and final beer of the tasting?
Third and final, maybe my favorite label, which is the Beer de Garde. It's a underrepresented style in America, especially. You don't see it very often, and we both like it as long as it's not the French version, which we sort of always see under-attenuated and overly sweet.
So in your opinion, what is the style supposed to be like, or ideally should be like?
Well, I don't know what the French, who named it. The way I see it is it's just a malt-forward farmhouse ale.
Right.
So saisons tend to be dry and yeast-forward. I think the Beer de Garde, I envision, is sort of rustic, malt-driven beer with a dry, finish. I think Anthony used some French hops in this, and it is traditional Beer de Garde yeast, which is earthy and
Got like a little in Castellane, which is sort of a decent commercial example of a Beer de Garde. You sometimes taste like a little bit of sort of mustiness that this yeast seems to produce. So it's really light, but almost tastes like almost like a little bit of cork or
cellar,
basement or cellar.
Like a cellar, like a wine, almost like an aged wine. That sort of.
Yeah, I get that. I get like a sweet, almost like rosemary, like bready, like flavor too. Also.
That's probably the hop. It's an interesting new hop, Aramis. I don't know. Can't remember.
I've had enough Beer de Gardes to know that this is, similar to other ones I've tried. It definitely has. It's definitely, like you said, drier a little bit, so it's a little more thirst quenching. What's the ABV on this one actually?
7.6 or 7.7.
7-1.
Yeah, I never brewed one before, but I really like to me this Beer de Garde would be like an alternative to like, I don't love like the holiday spiced ales, but this has almost that like nice sweet bready, aromatic malt richness that you could get like if you don't love the spiced beers. Like this has that rich wintry fall almost.
Mm-hmm. We released it now because we have another oak age version that we're releasing soon. But yeah, this is definitely brewed for the fall. A little bit cooler months. Not quite winter. I think think this is like we'll never do a pumpkin beer.
Right.
No worries about that.
Right.
I could see this as the pumpkin beer equivalent.
One last question I had for you specifically, Anthony, is I remember at the homebrew club meeting that you guys introduced yourself to, the club. You were talking about how you felt that there was like an ideal alcohol by volume range that you guys work in that you feel like gets the best character out of your beers, or farmhouse ales, Prologen ales in general that you guys brew. So can you just talk a little bit about why, what that range is and why it's so ideal, for expressing the flavors for these, really yeast that you need to, keep after.
Right. Our beers, we'll brew above it and below it for sure, and we do it all the time, but like these sort of beers, Saisons and Bière de Gardes, we tend to put between like 6.5 and 7.5 or 7.8, like somewhere in between there, so a little bit higher than you would be characteristic of a pure expression of a style.
Right.
But I think there's something nice that happens with alcohol, and we make pretty dry beers, but the alcohol can taste like a little bit fruity when it gets to a certain level,
right.
And it can have like some sweetness without being cloying. And I think there's also sometimes some other fruit flavors from the yeast that sort of ride really nicely along a certain amount of alcohol,
right.
where it sort of almost the alcohol almost sort of evaporates in your mouth and leaves you with some fruity esters, and we don't like sweet. We don't really make sweet beers or like them too sweet, but we do like them fruity. We're not making lagers.
Right.
And so it's nice to play into those flavors, both with the yeast and thinking about it in terms of alcohol and in terms of what hops we use. So it's definitely a synergy of all those things to try to get to a point that you're happy with the way the flavors are expressed.
All right. Yeah. So just to wrap things up, I know you guys. It's hard to say ask a question like that. A lot of people would ask at the end of an interview, where do you see yourself going? Because, especially in your guys' case, you're always experimenting, but because you're on such a small scale now, hopefully, you'll grow, continue to grow and grow and grow and maybe grow out, out of this place and go to maybe a bigger brewery. But, now that you've seen the reception of your beers, since you guys opened, as you guys built the brewery itself, where do you see? What are some plans you have for the next, 6 months to a year?
Well, we just ordered a 5-barrel / 7-barrel brew house, 7-barrel fermenters in Bright Tank, 7-barrel mash tun, and 5-barrel brew kettle. So that's the first sort of expansion we're going to do, and then double our amount of kegs. So we do like stuff bottle and keg condition, but not every place wants bottles. We
Right.
understand that.
Right.
So that's our other part of sort of expansion, to get our name out there.
And so where are you guys available now, just to tell people where to get your beers? Where do you guys, I know most of the time, most of the people have to come to you on weekends to get the bottles, but where else have you started, slowly but surely sending your bottles to?
So we have bottles and kegs at Browery Lane, kegs at Tourist, bottles, Beer Table in Grand Central, bottles and kegs at Beer Culture in New York City, Manhattan, sorry, bottles at Cannibal,
ABC Beer downtown on Avenue C usually has some bottles. Hoven in Prospect Heights usually has some bottles. Bar Great Harry, Owl Farm,
Right.
for bars.
And so slowly but surely, you guys, I guess, are increasing your accounts as you
Yeah.
see your schedule, as you see how much you can brew and keep up with demand.
Exactly. We're just catching up now. Literally 2 weeks ago, we didn't have beer to sell. Now we actually have beer to sell. So it's slow catching up, and we'll blow through it and then have to catch up again. So hopefully the 7-barrel stuff will help out with that.
All right, so hopefully maybe at some point in the future I'll come back and film an update to see how you guys have developed over the years and over time, because I see you guys have a lot of potential because of the great beers that I've tried, at least so far, and from talking to you guys, I see that your passion is really gonna take you pretty far. So I guess I'll just cheers you guys out, and
Cheers.
Thank you for having me at at Transmitter Brewing Company, and we look forward to seeing what you guys can offer in the future.
Thanks for coming.
Cheers.
Thank you.